for citizens to legislative appointees will still have the power to put someone on the ballot. And if someone files a dumb complaint against a judge and says he or she is not doing a good job, the commission can just say, we don't agree with that. They're not going on the ballot. They're doing a fine job. The commission's doing a good job. This doesn't disrupt that. It keeps their role in place.
Okay, let's talk about the timing of this as well. From the U.S. Supreme Court to right here in Arizona, it seems the judiciary has definitely drawn more of the political spotlight recently. Our current system has been in place for 50 years. So why is this something that Arizona does or does not need right now? Mr. Gordon, if you'd like to start.
It doesn't need it right now. I think it is an effort to make our system in some ways more like the federal lifetime appointment system. And frankly, that system is not doing us a good service at this point. This, I think, is an effort to keep the judges who are currently on the court, largely appointed by the prior governor, on the court and give them lifetime appointments. And we've seen at the current U.S. Supreme Court the corrosive effect of lifetime appointments.
Mr. Langhofer?
I just disagree about the federal judges. I think they're doing a great job. I love being in federal court. I think I've almost always gotten a really fair shake there. I'm distressed about what's happening in our politics now. Everyone's at each other's throats. And instead of saying, this judge ruled against me and he or she was doing a good job, I just think they got it wrong, I'm going to appeal, they say that judge is corrupt or he's biased. That's not right. And smearing judges' reputation like that and turning your rulings on a case into a popularity contest at the ballot box, that is going to have a very bad effect on the people who appear in court and need a fair shake. I think giving judges a presumption of lifetime tenure, like we do in the federal, like the framers of the Constitution did that, I think that works really well.
And you mentioned their fear of retaliation from folks that these judges are presiding over. Just to push back a little bit, with those two new positions on the commission, would there be concerns that the fact that legislators can now weigh in or bring complaints against judges? Do you think that might have a similar effect?
I've thought about that. Legislators and citizens can already weigh in. Anyone who wants can send a complaint into the commission or the judicial ethics folks, and it'll get a fair look. What this really says is that if a legislator files a letter like that or a complaint, that the commission has to do an investigation. It doesn't say what that investigation is. I think it's probably going to work a lot like the way bar complaint investigations work. Someone will read it, and if it says you should take this judge off the bench because his dog barks too loudly, they'll get to the end of the letter and that's the investigation and it's done. If it's serious though, they'll probably give it the weight it's worth and interview folks. I don't really see that as a fundamental change in the process. What is a fundamental change is we've got 30 people on the ballot. No one knows who they are. Take it down to the few who have real issues that are worth looking at.
Mr. Gordon, is there something to be said, again, for simplifying the process?
I almost never think there's something to be said for taking away people's rights to vote. I think Kory's view on the power of the legislators to start witch hunts is charitably naive. I think it will have a terrible effect on the Judicial Performance Review Committee because they're going to, my view, get bombarded by legislators who don't like this decision, don't like that decision, and they are going to require that commission to spend its time investigating. Those are volunteers, and how we're going to get volunteers to work in that atmosphere is beyond me. That's why a number of Supreme Court judges and retired judges are all opposed to this system.
Mr. Langhofer, would you like 30 seconds to respond?
They're certainly not all opposed. There's a divide among the judges about what this looks like, and that divide tragically follows partisan lines for the most part. And I think that's part of what worries me about this. The judiciary is becoming politicized. Keeping them on the ballots and making cases popularity contests, that is cancerous, and we should be careful about letting that spread.
Mr. Gordon, would you like 30 seconds to respond before we move on?
Yeah, it's not. So it's not on partisan grounds. We did a webinar on this, and we had 3 former Supreme Court justices in opposition. Justice McGregor, appointed by a Republican, Justice Palander, appointed by a Republican, and Justice Bales, appointed by a Democrat. And 2 of them had been Chief Justice, and one of them Justice Palander, who himself had been twice the target to being removed, who you would think would like this, probably spoke most eloquently at the corrosive effect this would have on the Judicial Performance Review Committee.
Now, you brought up the fact that if passed, that this would nullify the results of the retention elections on the 2024 ballot in counties with more than 250,000 people. So essentially, all judges and justices would keep their posts. We're talking a lot about keeping politics out of the judiciary. So, Mr. Langhofer, right now, 2 Arizona Supreme Court justices who played a substantial role in our state's 2022 abortion ruling are up for retention. How do you address claims that Prop 137 is essentially meant to keep them on the bench?
It's factually false. I was there for the drafting of this. I was at every legislative hearing on it. That all happened before the abortion case was ever decided. It's a good talking point because the issue polls strongly. People have strong opinions about it. This is before all of that. This was in motion beforehand. Fundamentally, if you have a controversial case like abortion, or 15 years ago we were dealing with gay marriage, right? These are like watershed social issues that people have very strong feelings about. The last thing you want, if you're in a court with a judge, you don't want that judge looking around saying, which of these sides is more popular? Which one's going to get me kicked if I rule against them? That would be terrible. We need judges to not be worried about who's popular, and that's what this bill does.
Mr. Gordon, your response to that?
Well, one correction of what Kory said, the bill actually passed after the 1864 abortion decision came down. What the bill does, and I know I'm repeating myself, is some voters will just follow the recommendations of the Judicial Performance Review Committee, but some voters have very strong feelings about the appropriateness of that decision. This will take away their right to vote on a judge regarding that, which is a right they currently have.
Now, going along with that, actually, only 6 judges have been turned out of office since the system was implemented, and half of them were in 2022. So we've seen that increasing effort by certain organizations, by political action committees, to explicitly campaign for or against retention of certain justices. So, Mr. Gordon, with this movement toward more aggressive action, aggressive campaigning, times are changing. So does the system need to adjust as well?
Not in the way that's suggested here. The question is who's going to have the authority to determine whether someone should continue on the bench. And here, under this proposition, it is largely going to be left to the Judicial Performance Review Committee and taken away from the voters. Let me give you an example. The Judicial Performance Review Commission does a great job, but if a particular judge or justice has a particular philosophical point of view, like they're a Federalist Society judge, which I think is total nonsense, that will never get them sent for review under this. My right to weigh in on someone who's got what I can only describe as a weird view of what judges ought to do is immune from voter review.
Mr. Langhofer, what's your response to kind of the changing that we're seeing, the changing environment surrounding these judicial retention elections?
Yesterday, I saw a flyer that someone was publishing about which judges to vote for and which to vote against. And I think it said that they should vote against one judge because he'd been invited to speak to a group that the person writing this pamphlet didn't like. And he showed up and he spoke to the group. So you should vote against him. It wasn't saying that what he said was offensive or even wrong, just that he's associating with people I don't like, so you've got to vote against him. This is no way to run a courtroom. Like, judges are there to listen to all sides, collect information, share their neutral opinion. They can attend a meeting with someone you don't like and still be qualified to be a judge. What's happening with the politicization of the judiciary is a very bad path for the state.
So that leads to one of my other questions. Can judges be truly independent, truly neutral in their decision making?
If you're on the ballot, and you have a controversial case in front of you, and you know whoever loses is running a big dollar campaign against you, not because you're unethical or because you took a bribe or you're mistreating people in your courtroom, but just they don't like what you thought of the law, it's going to be tough. I mean, I practice mostly political cases, so controversial cases inherently. And I would be really nervous if this current trend continues. I'd be nervous about attending court with a judge that I think believes the other side will run a no campaign against him if he votes for us, even if we're right on the law. And that's not fair to my clients, it's not fair to me. Look, we've gotten this far as a state and as a country because the judges have generally been immune from this sort of pressure. The current political environment is deteriorating. It's getting worse and worse. And if we let that spread to judges, it's not going to get better.
Mr. Gordon, can judges be truly independent?
In 90%, look, I practiced law here for 50 years. As Kory knows, an election lawyer on the other side, almost that entire time. 90% of the cases, it really doesn't matter what their political philosophy is. They just make a decision. It's in those other 10% of the cases, a lot of them are election law cases, some of them are other controversial issues like the 1864 abortion ruling. And they are, I think, deciding those not based on the facts or the law, but they're deciding those on their own philosophy. I can tell you with great certainty in most of those cases exactly which judge is going to vote which way because they bring their philosophy to the bench. That's not surprising because those cases get to the court, particularly the Supreme Court, because it's not all that clear. I mean, this notion that judges call balls and strikes is just nonsense. They don't call balls and strikes. Maybe the Superior Court, the lower courts do, but by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, there's a serious dispute involved. And in those sorts of cases, they definitely bring a judicial philosophy and follow it. And that's why the governors appoint who the governors appoint. To give that review process or that retention process more political input, which is what 137 does, and take it away from the voters. I mean, the argument Kory's making is the voters are just too stupid to figure out what the hell's going on. I find that wrong.
Mr. Langhofer, 30 seconds to respond to that.
If you look at the rulings from this Arizona Supreme Court over the last 4 years, and whether they're siding with the left or the right, you wouldn't know what their own political leanings are. They ruled against Donald Trump. They ruled against Abe Hamada. They ruled against Kari Lake, shifted fees against Kari Lake. That is hardly the work of a right-wing ideological court, which is the allegation from the other side. They say, we've got to get rid of them because they're ideologues. Why are they ruling against Republicans all the time? They're doing a good job to call balls and strikes. Everyone's going to disagree. I've never lost a case and thought it was fair. But that's not true. I probably have a couple times. I'm sure Mr. Gordon felt the same way. Whoever loses a controversial case is going to have a gripe about it. The real question is, are they trying their level best? You're going to disagree with them sometimes, but if they're doing that, that's all you can ask.
Okay, I want to get to one final question for each of you as our time is going quickly. Mr. Gordon, you do not agree with Prop 137. Are there other methods that you agree with to improve our current judiciary system?
Justice Bales had an opinion piece where he made some suggestions regarding changes to the Judicial Nominating Commission that I think are well worth considering. There is another suggestion I heard from some judges that if a judge is not retained, that the governor can only appoint a replacement of that judge's own party. That kind of makes some sense to me. There may be some things to make it better. This is not it.
But not this. All right, Mr. Langhofer, quickly, what is at stake if this does not pass? We have about 20, 30 seconds here.
When you have a real problem in your life, usually if you end up in court, it's because you've got a divorce or a criminal case. That judge has tremendous power over you. You need to trust that that judge is going to treat you fairly, regardless of how popular you or your opponent are. This protects that independence.
All right, thank you. It is already time for closing statements, so each of you has 1 minute, and to keep us on time, we will politely jump in if we have to. So, Kory Langhofer, you have the first closing statement.
Thanks, Danielle. Fundamentally, Mr. Gordon's worried about this measure taking away your right to vote. And that's not fair. That's not what's happening. Citizens control the judicial performance review process, and as Mr. Gordon said, that's still the driving force behind who gets on the ballot and who doesn't. When you have 30 judges, you and your neighbors don't have time to research them properly. And so in 99.7% of all of those elections, the judges have just been approved, not because they were fully researched and everyone approved of them, but because it tends to be somewhat easier to say, like, well, without a good reason, I won't vote against them. If you focus your time and attention on just the judges that may not be doing a good job, you're going to make better decisions, or you're going to have a better court system.
All right, Mr. Gordon, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
When Danielle read the summary of the proposition at the top of the show, it says it takes away the right to vote, it nullifies your vote this year, it gives these people lifetime appointments overwhelmingly, and it interjects the politicians at the legislature much more deeply in the process. Everything about that's wrong. Justice O'Connor did the state a huge favor coming up with this, and we should not just honor her memory, but recognize that this is a model. Vote no.
All right, well, this wraps today's debate over Proposition 137. And just as a reminder, Arizona's general election is on Tuesday, November 5th, and early voting starts Wednesday, October 9th. You can head to azmedia.org to see a list of upcoming debates and where you can find them on TV, radio, and digital platforms provided by our local media partners. For the full debate schedule and to submit questions for future debates, head to azcleanelections.gov. On behalf of our partners at Clean Elections, the Arizona Media Association, Reister, and Bitfire Studios, thanks for joining us.
Inflation is a disaster.
Kamala's inflation nightmare continues to cost the average American family every single month.
Loaf of bread costs 50% more today. Ground beef is up almost 50%.
Living Spaces is partnering with Krypton Home Fabrics, the top indoor performance fabric brand. With 6 exclusive collections and 30 luxurious fabrics, you can live freely and stylishly. Enjoy Krypton Home Performance Fabrics at Living Spaces.
Living Spaces.
The way we're sharing this debate is part of a brand new effort to support democracy in Arizona. Thanks to a partnership with the Clean Elections Commission, the Arizona Media Association, and Bitfire Studios, we're making sure these 2024 debates are the most accessible in Arizona history. That means this debate will air on a long list of local TV stations, radio stations, and digital platforms, including support from local newspapers. It's a shared effort among hundreds of local media brands across Arizona, and we've tried to keep the rules simple. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement. Candidates have drawn straws to determine that order. Throughout the debate, I will pose questions to each candidate, allow them to answer, and then make sure the other candidate has a chance to respond. Whenever a question is directed at a specific candidate, only that candidate's microphone will be open. At all other times, both microphones will be open. Thanks to voters across Arizona who submitted questions for this debate, but no candidates have been given advance access to any of the questions. With that, let's introduce our candidates for this debate. Democratic candidate Tyler Camp, Republican candidate Jerry Sheridan. And Mr. Camp, you have the first opening statement, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Richard, for having us. Jerry, good to see you again. My name is Tyler Camp, and I'm a fifth-generation Maricopa County resident. I've been married for over 25 years. We have 4 children, 2 in college, 1 in high school, and 1 in grade school. I was raised to be a person to serve others, serve a purpose greater than myself. It's why I became a cop at age 22. It's why I've traveled to 8 different countries around the world, serving in humanitarian organizations and teaching police in those countries. It's why I have volunteered to teach youth at my local church for over 15 years. And it's why my wife and I have volunteered for foster care organizations and food pantries here locally. So when Sheriff Pinzone's campaign team asked me to run for sheriff, I asked myself a couple questions. 1, is there a need? And 2, can I make a difference? We simply cannot afford to return to the days of my opponent and Joe Arpaio. The unconstitutional policies and practices, the daily headlines, the government overreach, the lawsuit that has cost the taxpayers over $350 million. And that dollar amount will continue to grow until we can fully comply and graduate from those court orders. So yes, there is a need. But can I make a difference? Absolutely. I have over 2 decades of experience with the Phoenix Police Department. Over half that time was spent investigating organized crime, criminal street gangs, and homicides. I retired in 2021 as a shift commander in order to move to West Africa with my wife and family to work as an executive for the largest anti-slavery organization in the world fighting human trafficking. For this past year, I worked for Goodwill and Thrive Service Group with the purpose of ending poverty through the power of work. We have a choice in this election, and it's clear. Do we want to continue down the path of Sheriff Pinzone, or do we want to go backwards to the days of my opponent and Joe Arpaio? Thank you.
Mr. Sheridan, your opening statement, you have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Richard. Hi, I'm Jerry Sheridan, and I'm running to be your sheriff. I spent 40 years with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. At the age of 18, I joined as a volunteer reserve deputy sheriff, fully certified deputy sheriff. And then I went on to work in the jail for a short time, and then I spent the next 38 years as a deputy sheriff. And first 17 of those years in a patrol car, by the way. I got promoted through the ranks. I had stripes on my sleeve, bars on my collar, and stars on my collar. 33 of those years I was in a leadership position, and 20 of those years in an executive management position. During that time, I worked for 4 sheriffs. I watched them very closely, each one of them, and I saw what worked, and I also saw what didn't work. But when I retired as the chief deputy, I'd like people to know that's the highest ranking uniform position in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, other than sheriff, of course. Because of my experience, I am ready to lead the second I get there on day 1. And that's probably going to be November 15th. So I've been endorsed by the Arizona Police Association, probation officers, Governor Doug Ducey, Attorney General Mark Brnovich, Sheriff Mark Lamb, and the Honorable Enrique Melendez, who was a Counselor General to El Salvador, and he's also the chairman of the group of counselors here in Arizona. The voters do have a clear choice. They can either elect someone like me, who can take over from the second I get there, or they can elect someone with no sheriff's experience, and he is a documented sexual harasser. Thank you.
And we'll start the questions. Let's start with the Melendrez case. It's hanging over the sheriff's office since 2013. If my math is correct, 11 years ago, a judge has put in a federal monitor to oversee the department after determining that the sheriff's office racially profiled Latino residents through traffic stops that violated the civil rights of Latinos. Mr. Camp, what is the path out of graduating from that monitor program?
Yeah, the court orders are a complex issue. It quite possibly could be the best and the worst thing that's happened to the sheriff's office. Best because it finally exposed the abuse and corruption, the unconstitutional policies and practices, the discrimination that was occurring when my opponent and Joe Arpaio were running the sheriff's office. Worse because it forced the sheriff's office to pull resources from the jails and from the streets in order to comply with the court order, and we're still paying for that. It has cost the taxpayers over $350 million. The good news is we are on the right track, or the Sheriff's Office is on the right track. There are over 200 paragraphs listed within the court order. The Sheriff's Office is currently in compliance with over 90% of those paragraphs, so that's good news. The issue currently are the backlog of misconduct investigations. They reached the peak of that number in December of 2022. The silver lining there is there were some changes made with the people investigating this and the processes, and since then they have cut that number in half. So if they continue down that path currently, they should become whole again in about 18 months.
Mr. Sheridan, what do you see as the path to not having a monitor over the Sheriff's Office?
Well, I have a laundry list of priorities, okay? This is at the top, okay, because this has been lingering on. The traffic stop was made in 2007. The lawsuit was filed in 2008. And I just want to make it clear to all the listeners that during this time, I was the chief over the jail system. And this was done by the chief over enforcement and the sheriff at the time. So I will work to establish clear communications and guidelines between the parties, because let's not mistake this. This is a civil lawsuit that's in litigation, and the way to solve this is clear communication, and we don't have that right now. And while I was not a named defendant in the lawsuit, I did inherit it when I became the chief deputy. And so it was already 6 years in advance of going on. And one of the things I remember very well was the judge said at one point that the first day I showed up in court, this was the day the Sheriff's Office began to comply with my order. And so I worked for over 3 years with the monitor to set the foundation that would lead to future compliance. And that's exactly what I did. I will continue to work with that. This is a very complicated matter. It would take someone that isn't familiar with it. Matter of fact, I was talking to somebody the other day, the new attorneys there. It took them 1.5 years to figure out what was really going on. So to get somebody new to come in here, it would delay that another 2 years. I can do this on day one.
And staying with you, the 2016 ruling, a 67-page ruling, you were named in it 26 times. The court found fault with the way you conducted yourself, including lenient and non-existent discipline to deputies. How do you think the court, this judge, would react to seeing you back in front of him?
Well, I think the judge would be happy to have me back in his court because he knows that I understand what is going on. And, you know, I think the reason the judge was upset with me in particular, one case in particular, was I called the order ludicrous and crap in front of 100 deputies and posse members, okay? My emotions overrode my sense of keeping my mouth shut about it, but I thought it was necessary because we were putting out, we had a detention officer that was murdered in his driveway, and he was a Hispanic kid in the Hispanic community. And so we were going to send 100 deputies out to saturate the area to look for the people that shot one of our own. And I'm standing in front of these deputies and posse members, and they're completely demoralized because the judge had issued that order about a week before. I wanted them to understand that I knew I wasn't happy about this and that I thought it was ludicrous and crap. But I also said, and the media never reported this part because I said it in a sentence, this order is ludicrous and crap, comma, but it's the law of the land and we will comply with the judge's order. The media never played that second half of that sentence, and it made it look very bad to me. And during the hearings with the judge about this issue, they never played the second half. The judge never saw the second half.
Yeah, if I can add on to that, yes. Absolutely. So yeah, my opponent is, he is very, very familiar with the court order because it's almost a biography about his actions while at the sheriff's office. And so if you actually read that second court order that you're referring to, his name does appear more often than Joe Arpaio's name. And if you read the judge's remarks, that's why he found my opponent in contempt of court for lying to the judge 6 separate times Furthermore, he found him contempt of court for concealing evidence of misconduct investigations, specifically involving a family member for sexual exploitation of a minor. So I think that's the trouble that my opponent will run into if he were to face Judge Snow again, trying to comply and graduate from the court order.
I'd like to rebut that,
Yes.
can I? Okay. Tyler, everything you just said is inaccurate, untruthful, and some of them are actually lies. So, and you're mixing a lot of different issues here into one to make me look like I'm evil. Let me tell you something. I was never untruthful before the judge. I did everything I possibly could. And as far as the IA issue, and that's what the second order was about, the judge wanted me to investigate 54 deputies for a policy that didn't exist. I did that investigation, and that investigation came up not sustained on those deputies. And so when I was signing off on those not sustained, I knew that the judge was not going to be happy, but I did it anyway because I did the right thing for my deputies to protect their careers, and I am not ashamed of doing that because that's what leaders do.
Mr. Camp, you talked about almost Melindra as being a good thing. Are there aspects, or programs been in place because of it that you would keep in place as sheriff? The Community Advisory Board, Hispanic Advisory Board, would you keep an outside consultant to serve as a check?
Yes, I just want to address something that he said real quick. These aren't my words that he lied to the court. These were Judge Snow's words that are listed in the court document. Anybody is welcome to read it for themselves. It's public record. It's listed on the Sheriff's Office website. It's there for everyone to read. And this is how I learned about it, was reading the court order myself. So this isn't my interpretation. These aren't my words. This is something I read from Judge Snow. But to address your question, yes, there's absolutely some things that came from the court orders. Changes needed to be made at the Sheriff's Office. That was quite clear. Improved training, some different forms of professionalism, the body cameras, the advisory boards, the Community Advisory Board. These are important parts to earn that trust back with the community, and those are things that I will continue to do as sheriff.
I'm Kelly Butler. My family has always been about service. One son's a firefighter, the other's in the Navy. My husband and I are small business owners, and I serve on our community college governing board, helping prepare students for the workforce. Unlike my opponent, service is why I'm running for the State House. He sponsored 5 anti-abortion bills and refuses to fully fund public schools. I will always serve you.
Mr. Sheridan, are there things that have come in place since then that you would keep?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I don't get scared of litigation because litigation helps government do some things that maybe they didn't think about before, okay? So the issues about community outreach, all those things, I put those into place. And they work very well. And I think that was the problem, is us communicating with the Hispanic community. What happened was wrong. There's no doubt about that. And but again, I was running the jails when all that happened, and I inherited this case. And I will again, and I will use that experience to be able to enhance the compliance with the court's order.
Thank you. Let's talk about jails. The Republic earlier this summer, reported on the number of deaths in jail, found twice as many than in Rikers Island, a death rate higher than the jails in Los Angeles and Houston. Mr. Camp, is that number acceptable? What is the cause of that number?
No, and that's, when I read that, that's alarming. My heart goes out to those families. That is unacceptable. And what I will do as sheriff is assemble a task force, a diverse task force, to get to the root of the problem. This task force will be comprised of medical professionals, drug detection experts, community members. We have to be transparent, and we have to get to the root of the problem. Some of the things that I would institute immediately are expanding the body scanners in the jails. This will detect drugs from entering the jail. Also expanding the drug canine unit that patrols the jail properties to detect drugs. And also I would work with the Board of Supervisors to purchase medical bracelets. These medical bracelets would be given to high-risk inmates, and this would track their vitals 24 hours a day and so that we could provide them with the medical attention that they would need in a timely manner. But staffing is a major issue. And we're at the sheriff's office is at historic lows with staffing, and I have a plan ready to put in place that would address the staffing issue. And there's three things that keep coming up when I speak to folks about staffing and recruiting and retention. And one is pay, the second is benefits, and the third is working conditions. Pay needs to be competitive with other agencies around the valley. It needs to be a step-based system so that employees know exactly how much money they will make in 2 or 3 or 4 years. This will help with retention. The second thing is benefits. I will create a walk-in wellness clinic for employees. It's important because it's a tough job working in the jails. It's a tough job working the streets. And many employees suffer from sleep apnea and PTSD. This walk-in clinic would have a licensed medical practitioner that would not only treat their physical needs, but also their mental needs.
Mr. Sheridan, you ran the jails. What do you think of this?
I did run the jails. I ran the jails. I was the chief over custody for 12 years, and I'm very familiar with it. I was one of maybe 3 people at the time that received a certified jail manager certification from the National Sheriff's Association. And in order to qualify for that, you have to manage a jail for 5 years. You have to teach about the jails. And at the community college level, I taught the corrections function, so I'm very familiar with this. So when I was the chief of custody, there has been about over 300 jail deaths since Paul Penzone took over. And I did a little research, and I averaged about 7 deaths a year in the jail system, which I thought that was 7 too many, because it's the sheriff's job not just to keep the public safe, but to keep the people in the care, custody, and control of the sheriff, to keep them safe also. Let's not forget, 80% of the people in custody are there, they're pre-sentenced, which means they have not gone to trial yet. They're innocent until proven guilty in our criminal justice system. So it's very important that we deal with that, and I did deal with that. I made suicides, because suicides and fentanyl overdoses are the 2 leading causes of the deaths in the last 7.5 years. So I had a jail intelligence team I instigated that had officers going into jails, talking to people, and finding the drugs before they actually got in the jail. We also had, I implemented a SRT. It was basically the jail SWAT team that would come in and do shakedowns every day in different housings to get the drugs, the contraband, and all the things the inmates aren't supposed to have out of their place. And the staffing issue, obviously, is probably another leading factor, because when you're supposed to have 2,200 detention officers and you have maybe 1,200, that's a problem, because now they're searching and supervising 6, 8 pods when they should be doing 1.
He talked about the role of a jail. Should jails serve as a deterrent, or what do you see as the role of jails?
Yes, but I just want to comment real quickly on what he had said. I'm a little confused about his experience. He often talks about distancing himself from the policies and practices that led to the lawsuit and taxpayers paying $350 million, but then he wants to take credit for the low number of overdose deaths in the jail. So I'm a little bit confused on what he's responsible for one way or another. That being said, yes, as sheriff, my #1 objective is to provide safety and protection for the people of Maricopa County. Everything I do, every policy that I make must be viewed through the lens, will this make us safer? Will this allow us to feel safer? And so I'm a believer in ensuring justice for all. And I want to talk about 3 types of justice. We have to do justice, restorative justice, and preventative justice. So when we talk about jails as a deterrent, that's absolutely a part of it. So when we ensure justice, when we hold people accountable, when we enforce the law, yes, we have to arrest them and detain them, and that should serve as a deterrent, but it can't end there. That's why it's equally important that we try to rehabilitate those individuals and provide them with the education and the tools necessary to join the job workforce once they exit. That will help prevent recidivism, and that also protects us as a community.
Okay. Mr. Sheridan, you've talked about bringing back possibly Tent City. Should jail be a deterrent?
Well, I'd like to comment on a couple of comments that Tyler made. You're right, Tyler, 100%. I ran that jail system, and that's what I was focused on. I was not, and you cannot seem to get this straight, I was not involved in the Melendrez case until I became the chief deputy, and it was actually in June of 2012 the first time I went to the courtroom. So this Melendrez case had been going on for 4 or 5 years already. So let's please make that accurate and get that straight. So, okay.
Would you bring back Tent City?
What I want to do is bring back a similar type housing. There's no way I can bring Tent City back. But the reason I want to do that is because it plays a key role in the management of the entire jail population, which Tyler would know nothing about. Back in the day, we had, at one point, we had 12,000 inmates in custody. We were serving 30,000 meals a day. This is a big, massive operation. It's the 4th largest jail system. And what Tent City did, it was only volunteers that were convicted that went to Tent City, and they actually liked it. I know Sheriff Joe made it sound like it was really terrible, but most of those inmates in there, they wanted to be there. But what it does, it plays a role in allowing us to run work release, work furlough, and I get a lot of support from the defense bar, and they're not Republicans, by the way, because of that. And it keeps the drugs out of the jail. Most of the drugs are getting in the jail now because the outside trustee inmates are mixed in with the inmates that are in a hard custody.
Okay. Mr. Camp, he brings up that you've had an extensive law enforcement career, not a lot in the way of detention. Do you expect challenges in learning how to run a jail system?
Yeah, if I can actually address the Tent City question as well. Yeah, my opponent here talks a lot about his experience, 40 years, 42 years. Unfortunately, that's the wrong experience. His experience drove the MCSO, the sheriff's office, into the ground. And we're still suffering the consequences from his experience. So I don't think that's the experience voters want, and I don't think that's the experience that voters need at this point. When we look at Tent City, I would not bring Tent City back. When Sheriff Pinzon was elected, he assembled a small task force to take a look at how effective Tent City was. And they found it was costly, it did not prevent recidivism, and it was not safe for employees and inmates. And my opponent knows exactly how costly Tent City was and can be again, because at the latter years of his time at the sheriff's office, he was confronted with the fact that the sheriff's office could no longer afford to keep Tent City open unless other areas in the budget would be cut. And so my opponent went ahead and declined pay increase for jail employees in order to keep Tent City open. And that's something I will not do as sheriff.
Very briefly, do you expect to be a quick study on how to run a jail?
Yes, the sheriff is the CEO of the organization. So the sheriff's job is to cast vision, set policy, make sure employees are being trained. The sheriff's job is to surround himself or herself with qualified employees, people that come from diverse backgrounds, diverse in experience, diverse in skill set. So as sheriff, I would place somebody in charge of the jails, in charge of investigations that are very experienced in that area. And so it's important that I create an environment for them to succeed. My success is contingent upon their success.
Mr. Sheridan, how closely would a jail run by you work with federal immigration authorities?
I'd like to address Tyler again. Once again, Tyler is lying about my involvement with the Melendrez case again. I just explained to everybody what my involvement was not. You know, the other issue is the jails are very complex, and Sergeant Pinzon, he was a sergeant from Phoenix PD when he was elected sheriff, and since that time, over 300 people died in custody, 1,000 officers left employment. It was a disaster, and he put the wrong people in place. And this, don't forget, the 75% of the jail function is the jail is 75% of what the sheriff's responsibility is. I have that credibility, I have the credentials, I did it for 12 years, and it was very successful. And in fact, the NCCHC came in and told the sheriff's office that this was the best-run jail system in the nation, and they wanted to use it as a model. They told that to Sheriff Penzone in January of 2017, the month he took office. Penzone did nothing, but it just went downhill with all the deaths, and that's exactly what's going to happen if Tyler
Very
Camp
briefly, would you
becomes
put
elected.
immigration back in jail, in the jail system?
I'm sorry?
Would you put immigration agents, federal immigration agents, back in the jail system?
Well, they already are there. They're still there.
Right, okay. Would that continue under your leadership?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. You're both voters as well as candidates. Do you have an opinion? We'll start with you, Mr. Camp, on Proposition 134, the Secure the Border Act, and do you have thoughts on how the Sheriff's Office would enforce